I wanted to talk today real quickly about balance and making sure that, especially for men, that we have balance in our life and that it's important for us to make sure that we take care of ourselves and that we have a routine. Um, a quick story, a while back, it wasn't too long ago, it was about 2 or 3 years ago, I was in a position in my life that I really didn't have to work. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to get up to go to a job or any of that. I simply stayed at home for probably 2 years without actually having to hold down a job or anything. And what I found out is that when we don't have balance, when things are too good, when you don't have to go to work, when you don't have to, get up to go to a job or have responsibilities, it can get quite dangerous, I think. And for me personally, what I figured out is that when we don't have balance, when we don't have a schedule or a routine, or also if we're trying to mask certain things in our life that we might are trying to cover up, such as pain or depression with things like alcohol or drug abuse, when we finally get off of those things and we take a look at where our life is, things can get really boring. And well, it's common sense because when we get off drugs and we're or alcohol or whatever kind of vice, the world seems a lot more boring because you haven't let your mind adjust to a level state, and when we get thrown out of balance, when life gets thrown out of balance, you know, when we, like I was saying before, when you get up and you don't have anything to do, for me, I felt really depressed. It was really depressing. It wasn't very fun. In the beginning, it's fun because you're able, you have time to yourself and you're able to think about things. But when you have too much time and you don't have anything to keep yourself active and responsible for doing something, you find yourself in these states of no motivation. You don't want to do anything, and then you come through these different challenges when you try to dig yourself back up out of those problems. It's like whenever you don't weed eat your yard, and you cut, you see the weeds pop, you see the grass popping up where you didn't cut, or where the mower over went over, and it looks bad. You know, when everything is perfectly uniform and level and maintained, things look nice, things look good, and it's much easier to maintain. But when things get out of whack, it's like when you go and you have, I don't know, if you have a property and you clear the forest line of all the brush. If you don't keep up making sure that that forest brush is down and you don't let it grow back up, you're going to start to see weeds coming up quite soon, depending on the time of the year. So it's much like ourselves and maintaining ourselves. If we have an imbalance and we let things keep growing without keeping them in check, certain things we want to grow more than others, but like weeds, we don't want the weeds growing up and disrupting the work that we put in. So, for example, when we get off of any kind of vice, whether it be alcohol, drugs, candy, food, whatever, you know, life's life kind of seems boring because we've been always altering our states of mind to a higher point, and no wonder it's boring. Yeah, I mean things are boring when you're always in the clouds, and but when you come back down to earth, you kind of get a wake up call that you know if you start getting into these cycles where that becomes the only thing that matters, well then you're not going to live a very sustainable life. Things are going to be out of balance, and you can definitely tell at some point it'll hit you. It hit me when I realized that I was on the verge of a breakdown. Um, but we also see that once things overgrow, once things are overgrown in the sense that our own mind or our own psychological health is becoming imbalanced, we then have to contend with the fact of, okay, well, yeah, I get the fact that things are imbalanced. Well, how do I fix it? Well, once we figure out what the problem might be, and it's different for everybody, it took me a long time before I realized that my problems were due to the fact that I didn't have a schedule and I didn't have balance, and that ended up resulting in me feeling depressed because I didn't have a sense of purpose or a sense of motivation to get up and want to live, and that's a terrible way to live. But I've been there. Um, but we have to contend with now. Okay, well, now we know what's the problem. Now we have to motivate ourselves with the little motivation we have after pretty much breaking ourselves down. We have to build ourselves up again, and that's also a challenge because now we have to push ourselves to get up and fix our own problems. You know, and as men and as Mgtow, no one's going to come and help us unless we have other fellow men and fellow brothers that are willing to be there for us. But majority of the time, we're going to have to figure out if something goes wrong, we're probably going to have to fix it ourselves. So, you know, it's the motivation to be able to get up and fix what needs to be fixed. It's not as easy, and so for some people it might be easier than others. But I think the one thing that really drives us over the edge to want to make ourselves better if we're going through a situation of, depression, or we're going through a situation of doubt, is to make sure that we set schedules for ourselves, we take care of ourselves, and that we have balance for ourselves. So, what does balance mean? Well, I think balance means different things for everybody, and I can only relate to myself. So, for me personally, balance meant that I was able to get up in the morning. I had a sense of purpose. I had goals and things I needed to do. I had objectives that needed to be done for the day and things that I needed to do. And when I got those things done and completed, I always felt better. I always felt that I put in some work. I did something. I had purpose. I completed something, and that made me feel good. You know, Tom Golden says that men work through their problems by being active. You know, women work through their problems by dealing with their emotions and dealing with it internally. And so that was something that really struck me whenever I heard that. Um, so I urge people to look at their life, and especially for men out there, this relates more to men than anybody. But for men out there, if our lives are in balance, we don't have purpose, we don't have things that make us want to have motivation to get up in the morning and do things. It's not good to always have utopia. We look at this. We look at the different experiments, like the mouse utopia experiment that was done. That utopia can, and basically it doesn't work because every single time it ends up in disaster because there's no predators, there's abundance, and because of that, there's lack of purpose. Because if there's abundance everywhere and you don't have to get up to do anything, well then what's the point? You kind of, your body just goes into a completely different state of preservation because at that point we don't have to expel as much energy, and it's only common sense for the body to retain that energy, not expend all that energy if it doesn't have to. And that results into a whole nother set of problems that the mouse utopia experiment that was done goes on to talk about. But I just kind of wanted to talk that out and say kind of my side of the story of it is that basically, in conclusion, the way I got through this rut that I was in, which related directly to not having schedule in my life, which led to imbalance, which led to being more vice driven, using substances to make myself feel better. These things ended up making the problem worse. And the way that it made the problem worse is now I had to sustain something else in my life, which was, addiction, and it was depression, and it was all these different things. Now I had to sustain that because I knew the minute that I either didn't have that vice or I didn't have something there to comfort, to get rid of those feelings, to numb those feelings, it would just start all over again, and it was a never-ending cycle. And I had to come to that hard reality when I basically sat and I basically had a breakdown. I had a breakdown, and you know, I'm glad I had that breakdown because it was a breakthrough in the end. Um, so I feel that any part of healing, any part of helping ourselves, especially speaking to men, it's important to make sure that we have purpose, because if we don't have purpose as human beings, we don't have balance in our life, we don't work on things and make sure that things are in check, the weeds will grow out, we'll become imbalanced, and we wonder what the hell happened and why we're in the rut that we are in. And for me, it was a very internal, what I'm talking about was a very internal thing. It's hard to describe, but I got a very keen insight, at least for my personal life, how important it is to make sure that we don't let things get out of control. And I understand in life things get out of control at the time, but if we repress those feelings and we do those feelings, then things will get quite crazy, and it takes some time to clear it. Like I said before, if you clear a forest line and you don't maintain that forest line to make sure that the brush doesn't grow back, before you know it, the brush has grown back, and you're going to have to, work all that time to get that brush that probably took 2 or 3 hours, depending on what you're doing. And it's a constant battle, and the longer that you go, you keep digging yourself into a hole. It's going to be harder to dig yourself out if we don't address these problems and we don't take a look at ourselves and move on. The other part of it, I think, strongly is moving on. We might get the answers, and it's the motivation that we have to, that little bit of motivation that we might have left to simply get up and fix, to get up and fix that problem so that we can help ourselves. It's exhausting. So I've gone through these internal battles a lot in my life, dealing with my emotions and dealing with the different things I've had to come up with in my life. It's a exhausting struggle, but it took me a long time to figure out what certain things will happen, at least for me personally, that pop up in my life that sometimes throw me off, that derail me from my main goal. And those are the biggest things that have always helped me, is that we have schedule, and that I take care of myself, working out, being active, getting up, and not just sitting at house all day on the computer doing nothing. You don't get anywhere that way. And it took me a long time to finally just realize that. I mean, it ended up in a breakdown before I was able to realize that. But the point is that I realized it. So, anyways, I appreciate everybody listening. I hope everybody's having a good day so far. And, if you're going through some hard times, man, hang in there. Get yourself out there. Get yourself into a gym, and release that energy. A lot of this pent up energy I had really just, it almost destroyed me. But, anyways, appreciate everybody for listening, and I hope everybody has a good week.